The first training that I went to was at a 2-day Angels event, and it was before the London Bridge War. And we had never gone to a war. We had never fought in units before. We'd never fought in teams. And Hugh asked Daniel the Bard, how do they fight in Adenvelt? Because we knew Daniel had been in Adenvelt at one point. He said, they fight in small teams with 3 to 5 people in a team, and they have a polearm in each team, and the guy with the polearm pulls the shields down so that the guys with the swords can kill him. So that was our official introduction to polearms. A polearm was thought of as a support weapon used to pull down shields. And we practiced like that at Angel's Anniversary a couple of weeks before the London Bridge War. And then I finished building my first polearm the night before we left for London Bridge. So I'd heard a bit of theory about it, but I'd never used it. And we went out there, and I was on the left center of the line. And I tried this business of swinging the polearm back and forth and pulling shields down. And it didn't seem to be particularly effective. I didn't see anyone killed immediately when I pulled their shield down, but at one point I raised the tip of the polearm up about 3 feet and I brought it down on the front of a guy's helmet, and he fell over. Oh, this has potential. And then, less than a minute later, they had a big attack on our left flank, and our left flank refused. And I found myself right at the angle point where the person to my right, Philip of Mead, was still facing the original direction, and I was now at right angles. And I was facing an Adenvelt knight with a greatsword and a guy with sword and shield. And they didn't attack me immediately. And after a few seconds I thought, I think they're afraid of this weapon. And just about then, someone attacked Philip, and Philip backed up, and he backed right into me and pinned the polearm to my chest, and the knight and the other fighter immediately killed me. But I felt that I was onto something there, and for whatever reason, I took my polearm to every event, and I fought in every melee. And it was probably 6 months of fighting in melees and being killed immediately, because the guys on the other side would say, kill the guy with the polearm first. But I eventually learned to live through the melee and to start killing people with the polearm. It became great fun. With the polearm, you have a greater selection of targets. You have a longer range weapon, so anyone who's within your range is a potential target. You could try to kill him, or you could thrust at him, or you could thrust at several people. With a sword and shield, you're much more limited in the number of people that you could possibly attack. And so polearms are very effective. Caid rebellions. Okay. We started off the first battle, I think it was 19 versus 19. No, we had 21, they had 19. And the second battle, 2 more Caidins had arrived, so we were up to 23. And for the third battle, the castle battle, there were 25 Caidins and still 19 Westerners. Probably the most telling thing on the first battle, which was a bridge battle, was we had 6 polearms and they had 1 polearm. And that got broken partway through the fight. So, they learned a lot about polearms, and I killed King Paul with my polearm partway through that fight. That was really nice. And in the field battle, we expected to lose the field battle, but we stayed a cohesive unit for a lot longer than anyone expected. And we gave them a good run for their money. And the third battle, the castle battle, we decisively won the castle battle. After the castle battle, they said, we should try this castle battle again, but we want to hold the castle. And Paul put his foot on the polearms and said, and we'll take these too. with them defending the castle, they successfully defended the castle. And we let them have some of the polearms. We didn't let them have all the polearms. It did cause a whole change in the way fighting took place in wars. A few months after the event, after the first Caid rebellion, at June Crown, we had a melee, and for the melee, there were, I think, a total of 36 people on the field. And they picked two of the newer fighters to be team captains and to pick sides. And the guy who got first pick picked Paul of Bellatrix, and the guy who got second pick picked Martin, and they advised them on who they should pick then. And Paul ended up picking a team which had 6 polearms and 6 strong swordsmen and 6 weaker swordsmen. And the other team was all sword and shield. And Paul called everyone together, and he assigned a polearmsman to each of his strongest fighters. And then he pointed to me, he said, "You know how to use that thing, come with me." And then he assigned the newer sword and shield fighters, one to each team, and he told them, it doesn't matter whether you kill anyone during the entire battle. If you keep the guy with the polearm alive, you will have done a good job. And so we had 6 3-man teams, each with a strong swordsman, a polearmsman, and a weaker swordsman who was to defend the polearmsman. And we cleaned up. We just wiped the other side out.
A lot of times, if we weren't doing war stuff, we were just doing melee, we'd have 3-man teams. So it'd be 2 shields and a pole weapon. And Robert really was the grandfather of pole weapons. So we made a dynamite team, just chewing up people that way.
As it was at the second Caid rebellion, we had 37 men in our army, which was really a big increase from the previous year when we topped out at 25. Well, we had also inspired the West, and the West was there with 51 fighters, and they had built the first shield wall that we had ever seen. They had not 1 polearm, they had at least a dozen polearms. They were prepared to wipe us out. Okay, well, let me step back. Polearms. My original polearm was a 9-foot, 4-inch long halberd with about 3 feet of blade, a couple small prongs on the side to catch a sword slipping down the blade, a thrusting tip, a butt spike, and 9 foot 4 inches long. And it was a very effective weapon. I didn't injure too many people with it. I did injure some, but we were still learning about things like chin straps and helmets. We didn't have a requirement for a chin strap and a helmet when I joined the SCA. And I'm probably the one responsible for that, because at an event in the Kingdom of the West, I nailed a person in the faceplate, and he was wearing a helmet that he'd gotten from another fighter, Paul of Bellatrix, that had cheek pieces that were inserted to keep the helmet in place instead of a chin strap. Well, when I hit him with the polearm, I pushed the helmet into his face and chipped 3 teeth. Which sort of, it took some of the fun out of melee. And after that, after that event, one of the knights went to Paul, who was king, and said, "We should ban that weapon from the field." And Paul said, "No, we're just not used to fighting with it. There's nothing wrong with the weapon." And Paul appointed a commission led by Douglas Longshanks, and because I was the person who was doing most of the fighting with the polearm, he put me on the commission as well. And so I contributed my experience to Douglas's report, and Douglas reported saying basically the problem is with the helmets need to have chin straps in them, fastened so that the helmet cannot be pushed onto the face. And so the armor was improved because of the weapon. If the weapon hadn't been brought onto the field, certainly sooner or later someone else would have made a polearm and started thrusting blows with it as well as cutting blows. The first long-range weapon that was regularly used was a glaive or a gisarm. It had a thrusting tip, a blade, and a butt spike. Spears became a separate category when they reduced the maximum length of a polearm with a cutting blade on it to 7.5 feet. And Kevin Peregrine was the Earl Marshal of the West when this was done, and Gregory of York sat in a marshalling class that he taught at Collegium probably about 2 years later. And he said, Kevin talked about how they had figured how much force was generated by a sword and the length of the sword, the weight of the sword, the arc, and tried to relate this to polearms and came up with the 7.5-foot figure. But then Kevin said, and if you've ever been hit by Robert Dubois with his 9-foot long polearm, you can see why we reduced it to 7.5 feet.